Good afternoon. I'm going to do a short reading from this book, naming Usuries Tyranny, which is a collection of poetry themed on how usury is administered worldwide through the Bank of International Settlements. So there's basically a reimagined Iliad for the modern age, using the theme of usury. There are a bunch of poems, philippics and whatnot, but I'm just going to read the first. It's an introductory essay, followed by a couple of poems. Introductory essay. The BIS and the corporate money state, a modern philippic on credit, tax and democratic sovereignty. A sourced essay in 14 movements after Cicero. Abstract. This essay argues that recurring crises in housing affordability, inequality and political legitimacy cannot be understood without confronting the political economy of money creation, credit allocation and tax design. It frames the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, not as a singular villain, but as a key institutional node through which an international central banking consensus is coordinated via research, convening power, and the standard setting ecosystem associated with Basel banking regulation. The result is a corporate money state in which elected policy is routinely subordinated to imperatives of financial stability, asset price preservation, and credit discipline. The essay concludes with an outline of reforms that treat money as a public utility, tax as a charge aligned with unearned land location value, and housing as social infrastructure rather than a leveraged collateral class. Prologue. Why a philippic now? Cicero wrote not because Rome lacked laws, but because practical sovereignty was being displaced by power organized elsewhere. Modern democracies likewise retain formal institutions while operating inside constraints that often appear technical. Fiscal rules, market confidence, inflation targeting, bank capital and liquidity standards, and crisis facilities whose speed and scale dwarf ordinary democratic deliberation. In this environment, the BIS matters less as an executive authority than as a coordinator of monetary common sense, a place where central bankers share doctrine and where global standards are incubated and legitimized. The most consequential outcomes are not speeches, but structures. What is financed? What is constrained? And who is made to bear adjustment? The pretense of neutrality. The first political move is semantic. Monetary governance is presented as neutral engineering, independence, rules, prudence. Yet credit allocation is not neutral. It shapes whether an economy builds productive capacity or inflates existing assets, whether housing is shelter or collateral, whether wages and rents track living standards or financial conditions. Central bank independence is often defended as insulation from short-term politics. Empirically, it is associated with lower inflation outcomes in many contexts, but it also relocates distributive decisions into technocratic space where accountability is indirect. The question is not whether expertise matters, but whether distributive power can remain credible and legitimate when it is structurally insulated. The tyrant in the web. If one expects a modern tyrant to look like an autocrat, one misses the point. Modern power prefers distributed constraint standards, eligibility rules, collateral frameworks, liquidity backstops, and risk models. The BIS is emblematic here. It convened central banks and hosts and historically incubated the Basel committee system that shapes bank incentives across jurisdictions. Basel frameworks are often described as technocratic safety, but they also create a shadow constitution for banking by defining what counts as safe, liquid, and capital efficient. They shape the profitability of lending categories and therefore the direction of credit. Responsibilities flight from Parliament to the market. When outcomes fall, especially housing affordability, that's when outcomes fail, especially housing affordability, responsibility is diffused. The popular story is a morality play about households planning or not enough supply. Supply matters, but it is not sufficient as an explanation for decades of price to income divergence, where credit conditions and asset demand are powerful amplifiers. A large empirical literature links credit growth and mortgage finance to asset price cycles and crisis dynamics. Where credit expansion is channeled into existing real estate, it can raise prices faster than incomes, intensifying intergenerational inequality and extracting rents through interest and land value uplift. Peace with the regime is impossible because it is not peace. Societies are repeatedly offered peace in the form of stakeholder processes and incremental reforms, better stress tests, revised buffers, improved transparency. These can reduce fragility, but they rarely change the system's core privilege. Money and credit created primarily through private bank lending, priced for profit, collateralized against assets whose values are then politically protected in downturns. The stability story can become circular. Asset values must be protected to preserve bank stability. Bank stability must be preserved to protect the economy. Therefore, the public must accept policies that preserve asset values. In housing, that often means protecting the price system that created exclusion in the first place. The embassy of delay, reform without structure. Post-crisis governance has frequently improved bank resilience while leaving the underlying allocation question largely intact. Why does so much credit flow into real estate and financial assets rather than productive investment? One answer is institutional. Banks prefer collateralized lending. Property is collateral friendly, and regulatory risk regimes can reinforce this preference. Another answer is macroeconomic. When growth is weak, credit gravitates towards assets that can be pledged, and rising asset prices then appear as prosperity until fragility reappears. The quiet war of interest and rent. The political economy of housing is inseparable from the political economy of interest. Mortgage markets translate the price of money into the price of shelter, and the interaction of credit availability with land constraints can capitalize into higher land values and house prices. This is why financialization of housing is not merely cultural critique, but a structural diagnosis. Housing becomes a wealth machine and a financial product, not simply a place to live. Housing as collateral, the Republic's moral failure. Where owner-occupied housing is heavily debt financed, the state inherits a stability dilemma. Nominal house price falls threaten household balance sheets and bank collateral, so policy tends to lean against large declines. This implicit guarantee can validate speculative expectations and entrench a high price equilibrium. The civic cost is profound. Shelter becomes contingent on leverage. Those without access to credit or family wealth are locked into rent burdens, and younger cohorts face price-taking conditions produced by decades of policy and credit evolution. Tax as production penalty, not benefit or charge. Tax systems in many jurisdictions lean heavily on labour and consumption, while undertaxing unearned land and location uplift relative to its civic origin. Yet the value of locations is socially produced. Infrastructure, schools, safety, transport, and agglomeration effects. When private owners capture these uplifts, society pays twice, first through public provision and then through rents and prices. Land value taxation, LVT, and related site value approaches have long been proposed as efficiency enhancing and equity improving, because land is inelastic in supply and location value reflects collective benefit. Independence and democratic emptiness. Independence can reduce opportunistic inflation bias, but it can also produce democratic emptiness when distributionally powerful instruments are insulated while fiscal and social policy are constrained by credibility. The deeper issue is constitutional. Monetary policy is not merely about prices, it is also about employment, debt sustainability, asset values, and the distribution of adjustment burdens. If technocratic institutions can raise unemployment to hit targets, while democratic institutions cannot reliably mobilize credit for housing supply, energy transition, or regional development, then sovereignty is formally intact, but substantively narrowed. Basel as constitution by other means. Basel's importance in not only capital adequacy, it is incentive architecture, risk weights, liquidity requirements, and definitions of high quality liquid assets are not just safety devices, they shape what banks do profitably at scale. This matters for housing because mortgage lending is typically treated as relatively safe, especially against certain collateral and underwriting standards, encouraging balance sheet growth in real estate lending during long expansions. Austerity after rescue, the civic betrayal. A defining sequence of the corporate money state is financial crisis, extraordinary support to stabilize banks and markets, then political narratives of scarcity used to constrain social investment. The public learns that rescue is unlimited, but rebuilding is conditional. This is not a claim that resources are infinite. It is a claim that institutional priorities become visible in crisis response. The question becomes, what is treated as systemically essential, banks or housing security? I'm not going to read the rest of that chapter. It's only a couple of pages. There are lots of footnotes, and each of those statements are actually sourced from various economic papers and what have you. As I say, it's an introductory essay. This is essentially, though, a poetry collection which works through the concepts in that introductory essay. So, unmasking the hidden power, the tyrant behind the curtain. Riddle, unmasking the hidden power. I am a force, both bank and state, a silent master sealing fate. I set false rates, I tame the nation, steal the land with cold calculation. I tell tall tales, I sell the lie, make saying men silent, force them to comply. I loan, I take, I bind with debt, a legal snare, a moral threat. My name hides in a global frame, settling scores in a financial game. An elite realm, an iron idol. My power reigns, unchecked, unrivaled. From Basel's heart I weave my plan, connected banks in a worldwide span. Solve my riddle, name my face, uncover the crime in this shadowy space. Clue, rearrange the notion of a bank beyond borders, one that settles the world's monetary disputes. Look to the repeated cries of control and deceit. My initials are three, a trio of power. What am I? Yeah, so I think it's a good read. If you like poetry with a bit of bite, a bit of political economy bite, then I highly recommend it for a bit of serious reading on the beach this summer. So thanks for listening.